Is it recording? Yeah. Okay. Welcome everyone to the Paediatric Elective talk. We've invited Jasmine and Aahil, final year medical students today, to talk about their experiences on their elective. So I'll hand over swiftly to Jasmine.
Yep, that's fine. Let me just share my slides. It might take a second to load. Yeah, it's just loading, sorry. Can you see anything?
Nope.
Oh, hang on, it's still uploading.
If it's not working, I can share from mine.
Okay, just give it 1 second. It's weird, it keeps flicking between uploading and then I can see your faces and then uploading. Okay, I might have to get you to share.
Yeah, no problem, I'll share.
And will I still be able to control the screen? Don't worry if not, there's not many.
No, you can just tell me when to move the slide.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, let me go full screen. Okay, has it loaded?
Yep. Could you just go back one?
That's one. Ah, okay.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So hi everyone, I'm Jasmine. I've been the secretary for Paediatric Society this year, and today I'll be talking about my elective. And I split my elective into 2 parts, so I'll be talking briefly about the first part, but focusing mainly on the second part because that was the paediatric element. Go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
And I will also be talking about how I financed elective, because I think that's very important and it's something I wish I knew ages in advance, and giving some overall tips and advice. And apologies in advance if anyone watched the MSA talk I gave, because a lot of it's quite similar to that. Yeah, next slide, please. So for the first part of my elective, I spent 3 weeks with the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Australia. They have different bases in every state in Australia, but I chose one in the outback because I really wanted a new experience. So before my elective, I knew I wanted to do something completely different to anything I've experienced as a UK medical student, both specialty-wise and healthcare system-wise. And I'd always thought aeromedical retrievals were really cool, but as students in the UK, you're not allowed to do them. So I thought, go somewhere else. And because the past couple of years we've been running an aviation and space medicine society, we had a contact through them that had worked with RFDS, so she kind of helped me sort out my placement. So with that placement, I got to do aeromedical retrievals, but also rural GP practices, because I've always been interested in rural medicine as well. So it was a really nice mix. And then next slide, please. And just to talk briefly through some of my highlights, obviously the retrievals themselves were incredible. So the way that it works is that the doctors will speak to rural communities. So rural communities across the outback won't have any doctors for hundreds of kilometers, and they'll have nurse-led clinics. So the nurses will call the doctors at one of the RFDS bases through telehealth. And it's really weird because they're so rural, but they have such high-tech video cameras that you can zoom in and see the writing on a bottle of pills. It's absolutely insane. So they'll communicate via telehealth, and then the doctor will determine whether a retrieval is needed. And in the retrievals, you either bring them back to Broken Hill because there's a hospital there, or to another hospital closer to them, or to a specialist unit, depending on the patient's needs. And the rural GP clinics are really interesting as well, because I got to see such a wide variety of health presentations. So Broken Hill's a mining town, so I saw things like lead poisoning, And also being in the outback, there's a huge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population. So I learned a lot about Indigenous health. And rural GPs get to do a lot more stuff themselves within clinics. So they let me remove and insert contraceptive devices and do some skin biopsies as well. And outside of placement in like the outback, there's not really much to do. So I'm glad I stayed at the student hospital accommodation because I met some amazing friends there. And like we'd go to like the Aboriginal art galleries, there were museums, there was a leisure centre, and also just the sunrises and sunsets were incredible. And every night you could see the Milky Way, and it was absolutely breathtaking. But that's a very quick overview. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about my placement in Nepal. So for the next placement, I did 3 weeks of actual placement because at King's you have to, if you split your elective in half, you have to do at least 3 weeks in each specialty. So I did 3 weeks in Nepal in Pokhara, which is a city next to a lake, and then on the other side there's the mountains. And I did paediatrics, and I did a day of a rural village post in general medicine. And then the other 2 weeks in Nepal were for kind of traveling around Nepal and trekking, which I'll talk about later. Next slide, please. So when it comes to my reasons for choosing to go to Nepal, I'd always wanted to go because my intercalation was remote medicine at Imperial, and we were meant to go to Nepal for our dissertations, but it got cancelled because of COVID. And so I was really upset about that. And ever since then, I thought I want to do my elective in Nepal. And also because I love rural medicine. So it kind of made.
Jasmine, are you still there? Is it me who's cut off or Jasmine who's cut off?
Yeah, no, Jasmine froze.
Okay, we'll wait for her to come back. Maybe Sarah's just joined, but it says it's only me in the meeting. What? Let me quickly go check up on her. Jasmine, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you can still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, you just can't see me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think my camera's just disconnected, but is the mic still all right? Like the quality of the sound?
Yeah, mic is fine.
Okay, fine. It's not letting me reconnect.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, I can still, everything's the same for me. It's just my camera's not.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So should I just continue?
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I always wanted to go to Nepal since my intercalation, and it was intended to be a solo trip, but because I went to Australia alone. But then I found out just before that another 4 people from King's were going to be there as well, so that was really exciting. And I went through a company called Education and Health Nepal, who are an elective organisation. So they have contact with multiple hospitals throughout Nepal. And the way it works is that you pay a slightly bigger fee than you would if you were to go through the hospital directly. But it includes, if you just click the next couple of animations. So it still wasn't very expensive. It was £150 per week. But if you go to the next one, it also included, so not only the placement itself, but also a homestay with a local family and 2 homemade meals per day. And it ended up being 3 homemade meals on most days. And they also let us use all their facilities like the laundry and things like that. And they were so welcoming and accommodating. They really felt like we were part of their family. They'd invite us to all their family gatherings and parties. They'd take us out places. They'd show us around the area. And it was really emotional when we left. They kind of threw us a massive party and they were all crying and stuff. It was really sweet, and we're still in contact with them today, which is really lovely. If you just go to the next slide. So because there were 5 of us from King's and there was another student from Cardiff, all in the same house, and the host family had a son who was 19, but they only had 3 spare bedrooms, which is something I'd wish I'd known beforehand. Because I was fine sharing a room. It was 3 of us girls in one room and then 2 and 2. I would just say that if you are going through an elective organisation that includes accommodation, it might just be worth finding out beforehand, because as I say, I had no issue with it, but it's something I wish I'd known before, just because it was a massive jump from being in Australia, having so much of my own space, to being completely surrounded by people. But yeah, it wasn't an issue. It's just would have been good to know. And then if you can go to the next slide, please. So the placement itself was hospital-based. Sorry, if you just click on the next 2. So in the mornings, we'd have a morning teaching session or board round with the doctors, which was in English, and they'd present cases and discuss them. So that was really interesting, hearing about the cases in the hospitals. And the ward round would last a couple of hours, and then we'd go to do procedures, mainly lumbar punctures because there was a lot of meningitis, but I preferred spending time in the outpatient clinics. And if you just go to the next one. So there were a lot of differences in Nepal, as you'd kind of expect. So firstly, there were differences in health presentations. There was a lot of measles, tuberculosis, meningitis, sepsis, things that would be either very rare or very severe in the UK. And it was quite a shock going into that and seeing all of them in the open ward spaces. I also saw really rare things like dress syndrome, which is a very rare dermatological emergency, and just really highlighted the lack of funding in the healthcare system. And similarly, in the outpatient department, the setup was that it was 2 rooms with 3 tables in each room, and there'd be 3 consultations going on at the same time in each room. So there was kind of no privacy in contrast to the NHS, but it was really nice to see the patients just didn't seem to care about that. Like, I feel like here we're a bit picky, we can be a bit snowflakey about and complain about different things, but over there they were just so grateful to be seen by anyone. It didn't bother them at all. And hygiene with regards to the outpatient clinic, for example, I mean, having 3 children in the same room increases the risk of spreading infection, but it was things like not cleaning the table between each person leaving. Also, there was no hand gel on the wards, and things like that just really highlighted the lack of funding in the Nepalese healthcare system, which was quite hard to see. And then there wasn't the obvious language barrier, which it wasn't too bad for me because all of the doctors at the hospital spoke in English, and funnily, all of the notes were in English as well. So if I didn't understand something that was going on during the ward round, I would just read the notes and it was okay. So before going, I think I didn't really think it through. I kind of just thought, it's okay if I can't speak the same language because it's peds, you kind of just play with the kids and it's fine. But part of the reason I love peds is working with the entire family. So it was a bit unfortunate that I didn't always get to speak to the whole family. But overall, I think in countries where there are language barriers, things like peds, surgery, and emergency medicine are very popular because the language barrier is still important, but it's not as, it doesn't impact you as much. And then if you just go to the next one. So this picture's from the rural village post I did. So as I say, it was separate to the hospital. It's just that the hospital administrator's parents lived in this rural village. So he kind of said to us, do you want to spend a night with my parents and do a rural village post? So obviously, because I really like rural medicine, I jumped on it. And it was basically a building in the middle of nowhere, and patients that lived in the area would just come in and go whenever they needed something. So it was very sporadic. So for the first couple of hours, I think the first 2-3 hours, there was absolutely no one. And then everyone started coming in, and it was things like high blood pressure or just like blood pressure checkups, kid with tonsillitis, someone needed their dressings changed. kind of very classic GP stuff. If you can just go to the next one, please. And then, yeah, just to talk you through some of our highlights from the trip. I feel like you can't really go to Nepal without trekking. So we did 2 treks. We did, on the bottom left corner, a 2-day trek to Poon Hill, which is 2,874 meters in altitude. And that was kind of to prepare ourselves for the bigger trek that we did to end the placement, which is in the top left. We went to Annapurna Base Camp, which took 7 days to get there. And it was, yeah, it really taught me resilience. It was so hard. It was also very dangerous when we went because they had like adverse weather conditions. So it was really scary because there were blizzards at the top and you could see the avalanches. And at one point we thought we'd have to turn back because it was really unsafe. But it was amazing being able to go and then watch the sunrise through the mountains. It was absolutely incredible. We got to go paragliding, which was fun because everything's really cheap in Nepal, so it was really, really fun. We also went to Holi, which is the Hindu Colour Festival, and it's something I'd always wanted to go to as a Hindu in a Hindu country, so that was amazing to be able to tick it off my bucket list. I haven't been able to include any pictures because they all had kids in them. We also did the world's second highest bungee jump at 228 meters, which was, yeah, it was insane. It was a lot of fun. And then, because I said that we did 2 weeks, 2 weeks of traveling. 1 week was the trek. And then we also spent a few days in Kathmandu, the capital. And we went to Chitwan because they have a national park. So we saw a safari there, which was really nice. And then if you can just go to the next one, please. So I just wanted to talk about finances briefly because, as I said at the beginning, it's something that I really wish I knew more about when I was applying for electives. So you'll come to find out that the NHS is really good at reimbursing you for things. Oh, is my camera working now? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, it's working. Camera's working.
Okay, and has the mic changed?
Mic's fine.
Oh, fine. Okay. So the NHS bursary is really good at reimbursing you for things. So it will reimburse vaccines, visas, travel insurance, accommodation, and travel to placement within your country for your elective. So for example, for me in the Outback, the only way of getting to from my accommodation to the RFDS base was by car, and I didn't have a license at that point. So my only option was taxis or like a 45-minute cycle in 40-degree weather, which I wasn't going to do. So I wrote to the NHS bursary months in advance to get like special approval for them to pay for my taxis, and they agreed to reimburse it. So it's really good, really make the most of that. And then if you just click on the next one, please. I was still very stressed about money for elective, and I really think that you shouldn't have to miss out on an amazing elective because you can't afford it. So there are so many funding opportunities and grants and bursaries that you can apply for. So this is a list of all of the ones that I applied to, and the top 2 are the ones that I was successful in. So you might look at this list and think, you know, she put all this effort in applying to 7 and she only got 2, but these 2 paid for more than half of my flights. So I think it really was worth putting in that effort. And it is a lot of effort. Like for one of them, I had to write an essay and I didn't even get it. But for most of them, it's like a good 1-2 hours of like questionnaires and forms. But as I say, it's really worth it if you need the money. So if you just go to the next one, please. So just some overall tips, and I guess kind of like a summary of everything I've said. When it comes to elective planning, think about what you actually want to get out of it. So some people just want to do it for the traveling, which I think is, you know, completely valid. You've done 6 years of med school, you deserve to. Some people really want to do the placement and focus on their portfolio and their work CV, which again is fine, and that is what it's there for. Some people want both, and again, it's really up to you. And again, when you're thinking about where you're applying, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the specialty that you want to go into, because I, at the point of applying for elective, no longer wanted to go into aviation and space medicine, but I still thought aeromedical retrieval would be really cool to do. And again, think about language barriers and how that might affect you. I would say maybe try and go for somewhere where at least one person in the medical team speaks the same language as you, just so you kind of have some idea of what's going on. And the next one, please. And then start planning as soon as possible, especially for Australia, because I'm not sure why, but the paperwork for Australia takes so long. So for my Australian placement, I actually started, I think, about a year in advance, and I didn't finish until a few months before the placement, just because they wanted so much paperwork, so many like police checks and national insurance checks and things like that. It was such a hassle. So yeah, I think now after your exams is the time where everyone just started planning electives. So yeah, and then the next one, please. So I spoke briefly earlier about contacting hospitals directly versus elective organisations, and I am in kind of two minds about it. So elective organisations, they are more expensive, but they're easier in the sense that it will include accommodation, and like normally some sort of transport pickup from the airport, and it's you're more likely to meet other people that way. But contacting hospitals directly is cheaper. It's more on your own terms, so you can find your own accommodation, but that also means that you have to sort out your own like grocery shopping and meals, and it can be lonely depending on whether you're going alone or with other people. I initially really wanted to contact hospitals directly, but if you've already started contacting hospitals, you'll know that they can take a really long time to reply, and they're not always as reliable. And the other thing is, there was one in Nepal where I contacted the hospital and I almost went with them, but the only accommodation I could find was really far away from the hospital, and I personally on my own just didn't feel safe traveling that far to placement every day, my own in a different country. So these are all things to bear in mind. Next one, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, your vaccines, visas and travel insurance are all reimbursed through the NHS. And please just don't be lazy about getting these done, because I only got my travel insurance, I think 2 days before I left. I just thought, I may as well. And I'm so glad I did, because one of my flights from Australia to Nepal got cancelled, or it got delayed. And then I missed my changeover, which meant I had to buy new plane tickets, which cost me like £650. But thankfully, my travel insurance reimbursed that, because otherwise I'd be in a really bad place right now. And also your vaccines. I think in total I had to get like 6 jabs and blood tests done. It cost me almost £500, but I got it all reimbursed. And I think really don't skip out on that, because there was one guy in Nepal who got bit by a dog, and he was the only guy in our group that didn't have his rabies jab. So they're really, really important. Just never underestimate that. It's for your own health. That's why NHS will reimburse it. And the next one, please. And yeah, we've mentioned NHS bursary. Just really look for those funding opportunities. The ones I put on that slide, it's definitely a non-exhaustive list. Like those are only the ones I applied for, but there's so many. And if you start looking early, you never know what you can find, because people have so much money. And just look for deadlines as well, because some deadlines were for me at the end of summer, so it meant I had to get on them as soon as possible. And yeah, just really look. They don't even have to be medical related. One of them I saw is like, if you go to a country with elephants, they'll just give you a grant. So people have so much money to spend. And the next one, please. Yeah, definitely have at least one backup option. Even if you're applying through Twin Links at King's, it's so important to have a backup, because there are too many stories of people whose elective fell through, and they had to just stay in the UK, which is obviously fine, but when you've been planning this trip for months, you don't want it to fall through. So for my backups, because I split it into 2 for each elective I contacted, I asked if I could do between 3 to 6 weeks at each one, so that if one fell through, I could just prolong the other one. But in addition, I also had a third backup, which was going to Cambodia through another elective organisation. So it's just really important to have multiple options, because you never know what might happen. But hopefully nothing will happen. And the next one, please. And yeah, that's everything I had to say today. Thank you so much for listening, and that's my email address. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I think Nikki and I have both learned a lot. I have a few questions. So what kind of presentations did you see in Australia?
So in the retrievals, I didn't get to go on many retrievals, but it was a lot of, I'd say mainly like chest pathologies. So one woman I saw was very sick. She had chest pain, and at the clinic they were only able to do an ECG, which showed an anterior MI. And her previous scans from a few days before had shown pericardial effusion and a pleural effusion. And then when we got there, we did an echo on her, and she was also in cardiac tamponade. So we had to fly her for like 2 hours to a cardiac specialist unit. And then by the time we flew back, it was like 9 p.m. because it took another 2 hours for us to get back. Another guy I saw had like lung mets, really severe lung mets. Liver mets from lung cancer. And he was a really heavy smoker. It was so bad because even before he got on the plane, he was like, "Am I allowed to smoke on the plane?" Which was very funny. Yeah, mainly like chest things like breathlessness. And then in the GP clinics, as I said, things like lead poisoning. I saw like DVTs, suspected stroke, kind of, I guess, classic GP things, but on the more severe end, because a lot of people just don't come into GP. And then with regards to the Aboriginal population, there are a lot of specific health presentations that they present with. So a lot of them will have ear infections. So it's really sad. You'll see a lot of kids who are just deaf because they've had untreated ear infections for months and months. And then because obviously ear infections spread, all their siblings will have it as well. But the government's really good. It's got loads of initiatives for the Indigenous population, like earlier kidney screening and heart screening and diabetic screening and things like that to try and minimize it. But I ended up spending most of my time in the GP clinic, so I saw mainly that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow. You've seen a lot. Nikki, do you have any questions?
I was going to ask, in terms of like arranging like backups and things like that, how do you sort of like navigate that with like, say like it's like your second or third choice and they're asking you for like deposits or things like that, but obviously you're keeping them as like a backup. I'm not sure, like, how did you like navigate that process of like securing solid backups without having to like financially commit or things like that?
So that's a really good point. I would say don't put a deposit in for anything unless you're completely sure that that's what you want to do. So with the Cambodia one, I actually was about to pay the deposit because I couldn't find anywhere in Nepal. And then I just thought, let me just do one more quick Google search. And then I just found Education and Health Nepal. But it depends on how you're doing it. So with EHN Nepal, they said don't pay until you get there. So that was fine because there was no financial commitment until we got there. With most elective companies, especially the UK-based ones, they would require a deposit. So I think only do it once you've exhausted your other options. Because if you're going through an elective company, from what I've seen, there's no rush with them because they just want your money. Whereas if you're going directly through a hospital, they might have other students coming in, they might prioritize other like local students over you. So I think it normally kind of just works itself out, if that makes sense. It is, I guess it would be a bit awkward if you've confirmed a placement and then had to cancel it, but I guess that's just what you have to do. Sorry, I know that's not very helpful.
No, that is helpful, like in terms of like how it actually like plays out. That makes all sense. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you, Jasmine. That was actually one of my questions as well. If you don't mind me asking, how much do you think your elective cost in total, like adding Australia and Nepal together?
So much. So I tried to keep a track of it at first. So the flights alone were £2,000, and the total of my grants was just over £1,000. So I guess £1,000 for my flights, and then the total that NHS owes me back is 1.5 grand. So that's for my vaccines, visas, travel insurance, accommodation.
Have you got it back yet?
No, it's going to take like 6 months because everyone sent their forms in at once, but it's been approved. So that's 3.5 grand. And then I just stopped counting because it was stressing me out too much. But I probably spent, I don't know, another £500-600 while I was there. So it can be a lot. Yeah.
The trip of a lifetime.
Yeah. And that's why I'm broke now. But I think it was worth it.
It's okay, you're gonna work soon.
Yeah.
Okay, final question for me. Apart from when you were hiking, did you feel unsafe at any point during either of your electives?
That's a really good question. I think in Australia, I was very scared about feeling unsafe because I was alone in the desert. But thankfully, because I was at the student accommodation, well, the hospital accommodation, there were so many people around me, and I just never went anywhere on my own because there's also a lot of crime in Broken Hill. So I just made sure that I'd always get lifts to places, or if I was riding my bike, because you could hire a bike there, that it was always during the daytime on main roads. And in Nepal, I never felt unsafe because I was never on my own. But I think if I were to have got on my own, I probably would have felt unsafe. So I am really glad that I had other people around me. But that's just because of the distance. The walk from the hospital to the accommodation was like half an hour. So I guess, to be fair, if I were on my own, I probably would have just got cabs because they were very cheap there. But, yeah.
Fair enough. That was all really interesting. Thank you so much, Jasmine. In the interest of time, yeah, I'll pass on to Aahil now. But if we think of any further questions, we'll message you. Thank you so much. Aahil, do you have slides or?
Yeah, just gonna share them.
Okay.
Can you see my slides?
Yep. Full screen.
Cool. So I'm going to be talking about my elective at the hospital Paka Kanak Kanak, which means Children's Specialist Hospital. So Kanak Kanak in Malay means kids or children's. So it was the Children's Specialist Hospital at the UKM Hospital, which is the National University of Malaysia. And that's me in the kids' hospital at the end of my first day. So bit of context, I did the first half of my elective here in Malaysia, and the reason why I chose paediatrics was in Malaysia was because firstly it's an English-speaking country, so that was a big factor. Obviously I want to go into paediatrics, so I thought it would make sense for me to do at least one half of my elective in paediatrics. The second half I didn't do in paediatrics or clinical medicine overall, and so it was important for me to get some peds exposure during my elective. I wanted to see child health being delivered in an international setting, so that I could learn about a new health system and also see presentations and conditions that I wouldn't normally encounter in the UK, similar to Jasmine. And the hospital that I chose was a new and modern hospital. So the Children's Hospital was literally opened last year. And Malaysia as a country generally is quite affordable compared to, the US, for example. The application process, so you apply online through the UKM website. You complete the form, which you can see on the right of the screen, and email it to the administrator. You can choose up to 2 specialties, and then there's an administration fee of £275. So whether you do 3 weeks or 8 weeks, the cost is the same. So that's something to factor into if you want to get your sort of money's worth. It might make sense to do a bit of a longer placement here. But there are other hospitals in Kuala Lumpur, which is where I did mine, which are free. They're public hospitals, although the experience you'll get may be different because, as I found out once I'd arrived, this was a semi-private hospital, which meant that it wasn't a public hospital like the NHS, which was super rammed and people waiting 10 hours, but it wasn't a private hospital. It was somewhere in the middle, and so that would affect the sorts of patients you'd see, as well as the conditions that you'd see, as well as the amount of teaching that you'd get, because I guess clinicians would have more time compared to a teaching hospital, compared to a public hospital, sorry, where they may not necessarily have time to teach. So the hospital itself, mine was a teaching hospital with an associated medical school. So the med school was based on sites. It was very modern, as you can see in these pictures. The kids' hospital was known for its colourful sort of buildings and park, which you could spot from like a mile away. So when I'd get an Uber into the hospital, because it was quite difficult to access by public transport, I'd just tell the Uber driver, yeah, it's the colourful hospital, and they'd know what I was referring to. This is the canteen area in the main hospital. I'll see if this video can work. But you could probably see there's a Starbucks in the corner, which is crazy compared to an AMT in St. Thomas's. But everything is super cheap. So even the Starbucks, even though it was at the higher end of the food in the hospital, you could get like a panini and a nice frappe for like £3, which is a bargain compared to the UK. And the doctors were very friendly, who were willing to teach and engage with elective students. So on the bottom right was the team that I was with for most of my placement. They were also friendly. These are all registrars in the photos. So the way that the health system works in Malaysia is that you've got a consultant who obviously oversees the care of the patients, who they're looking after. The registrars report directly to the consultants. Then there's F1s and F2s equivalent, but to be honest, they barely interact with the consultant. Very different to the UK, where F1s do interact with consultants and go on ward rounds. And I remember my first day, I'd clerked a patient, and the registrars were like, yeah, like you can present it. So when it came to the ward round, where we had the consultant, the registrars, the F1s equivalents, we got to a patient, and the consultant was like, yeah, so who's presenting this? And very bravely, I just I was like, yeah, I saw this patient, I'm happy to present. And the consultant was just like, wait, have you presented it to the registrar? And I was like, no, I haven't. She was like, do that first, and then we speak. So it's very hierarchical in Malaysia compared to the UK, where, you know, consultants will ask med students to present when they're on ward rounds, and F1s basically work hand in hand with consultants. Something to be aware of, but they are lovely. Obviously, it was my first day. I quickly figured out how things actually operated, so I just go to the registrars. The elective itself, so that's me again, but not in the kids' hospital, but in the main hospital, wearing my white coat. They told us that, yeah, it's really important that you bring your white coat on the first day. Wore a white coat, realized that there was no need, so I just bought a white coat for no reason. But you know, every day there'd be ward rounds in the morning and afternoon, and I was attached with the general paediatrics and respiratory team. After ward rounds, I would then attend clinics. So I attended loads of different clinics: general pediatrics, neurodevelopmental clinics, which was at the Child Development Centre, neurology clinics, genetics clinics, endocrinology and obesity clinics, and the cerebral palsy MDT, which was really cool because there was like 4 different specialties involved with that, including rehabilitation physicians, which I hadn't come across in the UK previously, but they were really important with cerebral palsy in terms of making sure that you know, occupational therapy were involved, correct arrangements were in place at home, and just making sure that general well-being of the patient was factored into any decisions that were made. I attended grand rounds every week, as well as loads of teaching sessions that were aimed at registrars. But of course, as medical students, we were invited to, and they really appreciated us having us there. In those settings, they encouraged everyone to ask a question and, you know, feedback their thoughts on a particular case. And so in those settings, I did not hesitate to put my hand up and put forward a few suggestions, and they were grateful for that because it promoted dialogue. That was my supervisor, which was really nice, and she made sure that I had a sort of positive experience, and also encouraged me to sort of explore the city and make the most of Malaysia, which was nice. Extra opportunities, and I think these were the occasions which really stuck with me. So there was a cochlear implant symposium day, where clinicians and academics spoke about when and how to assess hearing in newborns. They shared their latest research findings and case-based examples, and there was sort of people from industry also present at this day. It was a fantastic learning experience, but most importantly, it brought together the whole pediatric community, not just those working in, neurology or community pediatrics. It felt like everyone wanted to learn. There was lunch. It was great to socialize and meet other pediatric doctors that you wouldn't necessarily meet on your day-to-day ward rounds. And the second one was Raya festivities. So Raya is like this festival that takes place for a whole month in Malaysia, and there were quite a few bank holidays when I was there, which meant that I got the day off, which was nice. But Raya marks the Eid festival because Malaysia is a Muslim country. And the last day of my placement, there was a special lunch and party to mark the festival. And honestly, like they took the whole afternoon off, and I was like, in the NHS, this just would never happen because we're so short-staffed. But it was just really wholesome. Like even the nurses, junior doctors, consultants, professors, everyone got together. We were having like loads of food. There was music, and that was honestly just the perfect send-off for me. Um, got some pictures here. So this is a video of all the desserts. There was just so much free food. It was amazing. So that was another elective student that I met on my placement. She was a Malaysian medical student doing her elective in Malaysia, but there were loads of other UK students at this hospital from UCL, Leicester, Barts, and so I made loads of friends from the UK as well. This was everyone just enjoying the festivities, and this was my dessert plates. Some key reflections. So the health system is obviously different. They've got the government, semi-private, and private hospitals, which influence diagnostics, resource allocation, and the care provided. So, um, they were swabbing for viral infections at the hospital that I was at. However, I'm sure that had I gone to the public hospital, you know, 20 minutes away, they probably wouldn't have done that. Similarly with scans, and the way they manage conditions such as bronchiolitis varies significantly. There were similarities and differences to the UK. So, on the whole, management of conditions such as asthma, bronchiolitis are very similar. The epidemiology is obviously very different because I was seeing loads of bronchiolitis when I was there in April and May. Obviously, in the UK, peak season's autumn, so October, November time. So some slight differences in epidemiology. Um, I found that in Malaysia there was a much greater emphasis on holistic care provided to patients and families. So they really took into account, what the parents' jobs were, whether they'd actually be able to provide a particular medicine. And so they took everything into account, and made sure that the management was tailored to the patient. Um, but I think part of the reason why was because the hospital had resources, they had loads of staff, they had so much time to spend with each family. They didn't have the same levels of pressures as a government hospital would have. And so, yeah, some some reasons as to why I noted those differences. I saw some really cool rare conditions such as Angelman syndrome, which I hadn't even heard of before. Yeah, loads of rare stuff that you wouldn't, I hadn't even seen, having done my PEDS placement at the Evelina. And so, yeah, I think international experience is great, especially if you just want to have a, broader view of pediatrics. But it also made me grateful for the UK training, despite what people think, because as an F1 in the UK, yes, you're glorified secretary, that's what people say, but you do get to assess patients, have an input into the management of patients, manage acutely unwell children if you're doing peds or adults generally. But in Malaysia, at the hospital that I was with, those decisions were mostly done by the registrars. So yes, it did make me grateful for UK training, and also just, you know, inspired some energy and positivity in me before I start F1, which I think is needed given the current state. Top tips: find out what medical students and junior doctors can do in the host country and hospital. So I didn't actually do procedures. For me, it was just speaking to some patients and families. And yes, it was, an English speaking country generally. Most people had a good level of English. But even then, there were language barriers which limited what I could do. Um, Ward rounds were conducted in English. All the notes were in English, like Jasmine's experience as well. But obviously, if you've got families that only speak in Malay, that's going to be a barrier. But the doctors did a really good job at just sort of explaining and translating at the end, and teaching you and asking you questions and involving you as much as possible. Apply early. So for my particular hospital, I had to apply directly through the hospital. And as Jasmine said, they can be slow. So you may have to chase up, but they will respond. If there's a particular subspecialty you want to do, have a look online at the hospital website and find a supervisor that you can get in touch with directly, because they'll just be able to take you under their wing. So when I was actually there, even though I had a named supervisor, I came across like amazing professors, who were like great researchers and loved teaching. They basically unofficially supervised me whilst I was there as well. But I found out that they actually supervise people if they emailed from students. And so if you can arrange that in advance, then it just means that you might be with a supervisor in a particular specialty that you want, and you can get the most out of the placements. Book flights in advance. It will just save you loads of money, and make the most of your time there. And by that, I mean do some traveling on weekends. So Kuala Lumpur's a great central location because it means you can get to Genting Highlands, which is a really nice place, which you don't need to spend more than a day, half a day there, but it's like a 30-45 minute drive. Penang, which is like a 3-hour drive, so you can, leave on a Friday evening and be back for a Sunday night. Langkawi Island, which is loads of beaches, super cheap, and Singapore, which is a flight away. So that's Kuala Lumpur on the top left. The picture of the sunset with the horse is Penang, which is like a 3-hour drive or an hour flight. The picture where it says Dayang Bunting Marble Geoforest Park is in Langkawi, and we did some sort of kayaking there, which was really good fun, and it cost like £2.50. That's what I mean by cheap. The same thing elsewhere could have cost like £20 or £30. Far right is Singapore, which I did towards the end of my trip. Bottom left is the beach in Langkawi as well. So do make the most of it, because if you're traveling all the way there, it'd be a shame not to take part in some of these expeditions and activities. That's the end of my slides.
Thank you so much, Aahil. Does anyone have any questions? If not, I have some questions. So one of my questions is, do you find that there are any cultural differences, and how did you navigate that?
Do you have anything specific in mind in terms of cultural differences?
Not really, not really. It's just I'm very mindful that I guess like, you know, the general demographics very different to the UK?
Yeah, I guess in principle, like they were fine with me coming from London, UK, sort of examining patients. They were just, you know, I was an extended member of their team, and so they would just do a brief explanation, make sure, you know, they got consent from the patient. But generally speaking, they were really happy for me to get involved and see patients. Parents were quite understanding, so I don't think there was anyone that said, no, you can't sort of examine my baby. In terms of other cultural differences, the hierarchy I mentioned, I guess there's a hierarchy in the UK as well, but yeah, it was you would normally it also depended on which consultant you had and which team you were, because for some they were just like I said, they loved teaching so much that they almost welcomed questions and interaction from you, and so hierarchy didn't matter. You could go straight to the consultant. Whereas for others, it was yeah, go to the registrar first, and then they'll get in touch with me. So maybe that's like cultural difference, but again, I was there for such a short period of time that I can't make any sort of generalized comments on that. In terms of general cultural differences, hospitality, I think they're just so hospitable. Like, you know, they'll give you foods. I know my friend got invited to his consultant's house for dinner. Um, like you just build loads of rapport with the people that you're working with. That you know they're totally cool with you WhatsApping them, asking them questions about, oh, where should I go? I'm not quite sure. Like they're really friendly and approachable. Whereas I know sometimes it can be quite daunting from my experience as a med student in London. Um, yeah, very different experience there.
That's really sweet. I'm glad you had a good time there. Did you go with someone else as well? Like, what did you do for accommodation?
So, really good question. I think there's pros and cons to going by yourself. Traveling by yourself, you do get that flexibility of doing whatever you want, as in, you know, if there's particular places you want to visit, if you want to, you know, stay till the end of the day at placement, like you can do what you want when you're by yourself. However, that comes at a cost in terms of accommodation, but you get that reimbursed through the NHS bursary. So maybe not so much accommodation, but when you do traveling, you know, accommodation when you're not in your host city, that can be quite expensive. Um, but I went with my friend from school, who was from UCL, but had his accommodation his elective dates at sort of the same time as me, so we went together. And then whilst we were there, there were other, like I mentioned, other med students from UCL and other medical schools in the UK, and so when we did do traveling, we were sort of all together, and so yeah, it made it more enjoyable, I think, than being by yourself, because it can be quite daunting in a foreign city.
It's nice to have some company, I guess, when you're traveling as well. What were my other questions? Oh yeah, you said you should organize your elective early. How early did you organize yours?
So I said early, but in actual fact, it doesn't have to be that early. So I sent my application form in June, um, but then I kept changing the dates because I was waiting to hear back from other sort of places that had applied for my elective, and I didn't actually find those dates out until March, which is quite late. But I'd already confirmed my Malaysia elective, but they were very flexible with the dates, so they didn't mind too much. So I only confirmed the dates with them in March, April, which is quite late. But I got the elective sorted out before then.
Oh, fair enough, fair enough. I guess it really depends on the institution as well, and like what other things you have planned for your other half of the elective if you're going to do two. So what other language do they speak in Malaysia again? Malay, and do they speak Chinese as well?
Some people do,
Mhm.
but to be honest, it's Malay or English.
Okay. So do most doctors speak Malay and English, or?
All doctors will speak English.
Mhm.
They'll speak Malay as well. Which one of the two they speak will depend on how comfortable the doctor feels speaking English. But with the consultant, all the conversations are in English. And uh, all conversations within the hospital in terms of patient care should be in English because the notes are also in English. But it's just informal, casual conversations about patients tend to be in Malay.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I've also heard that like lots of other countries, like for example Taiwan, like do their medical notes in English, but then their patients speak Taiwanese. So I thought that's really fascinating. Um, does anyone have any questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, I actually had a couple questions. So I guess the first thing was like, so obviously in terms of like organizing when you're doing two electives, particularly if maybe you're doing like one that's clinical and one that's maybe like non-clinical, in terms of like arranging them, do you think it matters like the order you do it in? Like are you glad that you structured your like two electives in the way that you did, or do you think doing it the other way around like would have been better, or does it like not make a difference?
Um, I don't think it makes a massive difference. The only thing is, if you do your non-clinical elective first, and then you do your clinical elective abroad, then you might be able to do some additional traveling towards the end of it because there's a gap between the second elective and your graduation, and so it might make sense for you to do it that way because then you can make the most of your travels. Because if you're already abroad, then you can just add on a week or so. But because I had a few fixed things in place, like the RCPCH conference in the middle, which I had to be there for, um, I wasn't too fussed about doing my international one first.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the other thing as well, like, I guess this is a question for both of you, really. I'm not sure, like, if you guys like applied to Twin Links, but like, if you or even if you just know, like, from your like friends and stuff, if you apply to like want to apply to Twin Links, like, how does that affect like your elective planning process? Like, would you say you have to wait until you get your Twin Links outcome to then look at other options, for example, or can you start like planning things really early on and then like change your mind if you get a Twin Links offer? Like, what's the best way of like navigating that, like your like independent elective arrangements versus like what opportunities you can get through King's?
So I'll have a go at answering that, but because I didn't do the twin links, I won't be able to provide like a full response. But basically, when you want to do loads of different things and if especially if they're competitive and you're applying for them, such as a twin links, such as an FMLM elective, which I'm speaking about on Wednesday at the MSA event, by the way. Not the MSA, the King's elective talk. It's quite difficult, and that's part of the reason why I booked my flight so late because I was waiting to hear back from these various things that I'd applied for. So I think, in short, it's difficult because you can't confirm one elective if you haven't heard back from others. And I thought my friends who also did the same in terms of twin links and other electives had the same experience where they just had to book their flights so late, so close to the leaving dates, either because the people were slow at responding or the other elective hadn't responded. So I think it's difficult and you just have to sort of accept that. But you know, if there's one elective which you're 100% sure that you want to do and you've heard back from that, then just plan accordingly. You don't wait until you hear back from everyone because you can also negotiate saying that I can't do those dates because I've got med school, I've got this fixed program, and then the other elective will be able to just move their dates around. So I did that actually. I actually, changed the dates so that I started in May and finished later in June.
Nikki, I think I can answer that question as well. Oh, sorry, Jasmine, do you have something to say? Oh, you muted. Jasmine, you're still muted.
I think it's your mic that's not working, maybe. Oh no. We'll never find out what you had to say. Yeah. Thanks. What were you going to say about it?
Nuggets of knowledge from Jasmine. Well, hopefully she'll get her mic sorted. Yeah, so I can speak on twin links and organising other electives because I am doing a twin links. Essentially, I think it depends on the institution you apply to, but where I apply, so for Tokyo, for example, they have their own like blocks, as they call, so they have their own set dates of when they're accepting students, and then they have a whole grid of which specialty and is available for which blocks, because they run all year round and accept people all year round. So I'm kind of currently in the process of like finalizing that elective first and like getting my dates like solidly written down so that I can say that's over and done with before I can book my other independent elective. And I know my friends for Johns Hopkins, they can only start applying like 6 months before their elective. So if you get accepted for Johns Hopkins and you want to do another elective, which you probably have to, depending on the length of your elective at Johns Hopkins, you would have to wait a bit longer. It's a bit of a gamble in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that.
Do you think Jasmine's going to come back? Should I stop the recording and then Jasmine can come back?
I think Jasmine said she was going to type her response in the chat, I think.
No.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Yeah, okay, Jasmine, type your response and I'll stop the recording.